Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this session, Beyond Multiple Choice Assessment Using Non-Traditional Exams. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. They are Rachel Krieger and Shawn Jackson. Rachel and Shawn are both learning and teaching technology consultants for LSA. Rachel has a background in teaching and learning with 6 years of experience as a K-12 public school teacher. Rachel earned her undergraduate degree in education from Michigan State University. She also holds a graduate degree in educational technology from Michigan State. At LSA, Rachel helps instructors design effective teaching strategies and learning activities, and also supports the use of technology tools available in LSA. Shawn has a background in video production. He earned his degree from U of M in film, television, and media. And currently, Shawn is an instructional video consultant with LSA Technology Services. In that role, he supports instructors in creating video content and creating multimedia assignments for their courses. Okay, Shawn and Rachel.
All right, thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day today to join us to talk about non-traditional types of assessments. So in today's session, we're going to cover a couple of things. First being the importance of integrating higher order thinking into your assessments, various options for those non-traditional types of assessments, and then thinking about designing these assessments with DEI and academic integrity in mind. All right, so first off, we're going to kind of start thinking about higher order thinking and why we might want to incorporate that, why it would be important to incorporate that into our assessments. And so this higher order thinking comes from Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is really kind of 6 categories of thinking, working their way up from kind of lower order thinking to higher order thinking. And the first 2 levels of thinking are remembering and understanding. And those 2 categories of thinking really kind of only assess the basic comprehension of terms and concepts in a course. And so those lend really well to multiple choice types of assessments. But the higher order thinking questions really promote critical thinking. They assess students on their ability to kind of better apply, evaluate, and demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. And so if we flip to the next slide, you'll be able to see kind of those other categories of thinking that we're going to kind of be focusing on today are being able to apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. We will have links to additional resources for Bloom's taxonomy and this kind of idea around higher order thinking. So, you know, if you've never seen it before, we'll have resources linked in the slides for you to kind of dive deeper into. And if you have heard of it and kind of are already incorporating these into your teaching, that is wonderful. All right, so the first non-traditional assessment that we're going to look at today are problem-based or could be take-home exams. And so these type of problem-based assessments are going to incorporate a smaller number of questions rather than your kind of typical multiple choice. However, they are going to require more of that higher order thinking that we just talked about. Now, with these types of problems, of course, you can do problem-based exams in person as well, but they do lend really well to remote or hybrid types of learning because you can have them be take-home exams. And with being take-home exams, the idea of thinking about the allowable time frame that you're going to encourage students to complete these types of assessments in are going to typically be a little bit longer than what you would have them complete in class. Typically, if they were doing these assessments in class, they would have the class period, whether that be 60 minutes, an hour and a half, or whatever. But if they're doing it as a take-home exam, allowing them to really have a longer time frame to complete them. So maybe that would be a day, maybe that would be a couple of days, even sometimes a week, because students are going to have different schedules. They're not all going to be completing it at the exact same time. And they are going to be allowed to use class materials, notes that they've taken during lectures, maybe readings, articles, the textbook, to be able to help them to answer some of their questions. And so being able to use all of those course materials to aid them in answering the questions, it is going to take them a little bit longer than not having those. So that kind of brings us into kind of these clear expectations, or, thinking about academic integrity. A lot of people ask, well, with a take-home exam, how can I ensure that students are not going to be cheating or just looking things up on the internet, Googling the answers? And of course, there's no way to, completely make it foolproof and not have them cheat or be able to do those things. However, providing clear expectations and having in-class discussions specifically about academic integrity is going to help deter that, and to really make students clear on what it is that you're expecting, and what it is that they are allowed and not allowed to do. And we've found that just by having those really dedicated in-class discussions about that has been really beneficial and help to deter some of that cheating. The other thing is rubrics. So these problem-based take-home exams, they are going to be a little bit more time-consuming to grade than a multiple choice. And having written responses can kind of be all over the place. And so how do you ensure that you are grading consistently across all of your exams? And especially if you have a larger class where you're having GSIs helping you with grading, multiple sections, having those rubrics are really going to help to make sure that there is, consistency and equity across all of the grading for your exams. And like Terry said earlier, our next session coming up is going to be all about rubrics. And so if you're interested, make sure to attend that one. So the next one is reflective writing and portfolios. So this type of assessment is really going to kind of take place over the course of your class. It's not necessarily going to just be at the very end. This is something that you're going to want to plan for from the very beginning of your class, kind of thinking through what it is that you want the students to reflect upon. If they are creating some sort of portfolio, what pieces of work throughout the term do you want them to kind of be collecting and adding to their portfolio? And how are you going to want them to reflect on those different pieces? Perhaps if they are collecting pieces throughout the term, at the end of the term, they could then kind of review all of those pieces and do reflective writing on each of those. What did they learn during that assignment? What did they struggle on? What could they, have done differently the next time? Or what have they learned since they last completed that assignment? They could even select one of those assignments and recreate it, or add to it in order to expand their knowledge based on what they've learned since they completed that assignment. So really the reflective writing and portfolios are going to be more kind of a cumulative assessment throughout the entire term, that they're kind of that the students are thinking of throughout the entire term, not just at the very end. That is something that they're going to have to study for. With reflective writing and portfolios, peer review can work really well for this. Having students be able to view each other's work and provide each other feedback and review on what they've done, that can work really well with portfolios. And of course, those expectations and rubrics, again, is going to be really important. Providing those expectations and what you're wanting the students to do from the very beginning of the term, and reminding of them of that throughout the term, so that when they get to the end of the term and they have to have this kind of collective portfolio of things that they've curated and so chosen, they're not having to kind of do that all at the end. They have time throughout the term to be able to think and collect those pieces, so they're not scrambling the day before it's due.
So next we're going to talk a little bit about media projects. So this is an umbrella term to talk about anytime a student is creating a new piece of media, whether that's a podcast, a video essay, animation, website, photo gallery, you name it, as part of completing their course. Some important things to keep in mind when you're designing these is to think about the mode or modality that the students are actually writing in, and how that switches from, say, writing a paper to presenting it verbally. You also, if they're doing anything visual, you have things like gestures or spatial differences that can also play a role in how things are told and how things are shown in the piece of media. I linked in the notes of this slide a link to the Sweetland Writing Center's website about this topic in particular. It's a good deep dive if you're interested in reading more about this. These type of projects really benefit from scaffolding. So what we mean by that is that you introduce smaller bits of the topic and then build upon that, right? So introducing them to the idea of creating a video, and then showing them, student examples, and then having them write a proposal about what they're going to do, and then having them, write a script, maybe a rough draft. Doing this iterative process over the course of the semester, rather than have one large project due at the end, will kind of spread out the assessment, and will also make sure that students are on an equal playing field as far as topic complexity and in terms of rigor, right? So making sure that no one is choosing an argument that is not up to task, right? You can kind of catch that at the proposal stage or even the work in progress stage. When you design these kind of projects, thinking about how much time it would take a student to do this, you can kind of think about, what is it replacing? If it's replacing a final exam, how much time do you think students take to study for a final exam? Or if they're writing a final term paper, how much time they're spending writing and researching this paper? And you can kind of make an estimate about how long it would take to create this project, right? And so you want to do kind of a one-for-one, if you can, of switching it out, knowing that things like video essays or animation take longer to produce just because of the mechanics of the actual creation. And so you'll want to make sure that there's a little less going into it, content-wise and length-wise, to make up for the complexity of creating the media object. You also want to make sure that you have an idea of whether or not you want groups or solo projects here. Solo projects work really great for video essays or podcasts, where you're essentially translating one thing into another thing. But group projects work really well for larger projects, in large part because you're spreading out the knowledge, right, of creating these tools. You'll have a certain percentage of students in your class, no matter what discipline you're in, that will have who will have done a project like this previously. And so by creating group projects, you can kind of spread that knowledge throughout the entire course, rather than have individual students have an upper hand, because they may have knowledge of the particular software that you're using to create these objects with. Peer review is also pretty important if you're using with groups, just so you can get an idea of where students are with their groups. But also students can give feedback on rough cuts, right? So you don't necessarily have to watch all the rough cuts. Maybe students share them with other groups, and so they can get an idea of where they want to improve their media object by the time the final project is due. Rubrics and expectation settings are even more important, I think, in this than other objects. Just having, or other assessments, having some expectations as far as quality, the amount of content that needs to be in, the type of content that's going to be in it. If you want them to make, say, an original argument, making sure they know what that means and know what that would entail in terms of the course objectives. Also, having a rubric and having that be sent out to them will know whether or not they need to focus more on the content or the delivery method, right? So if you want something that's going to be polished, that's going to be public, and maybe published onto the department website or in a final group project, you'll want to make sure that they know ahead of time that they'll be judged on the quality of the video recording and audio recording, as opposed to just the content or just the argument that they're making. Also, I'll put a shout out here, and there's going to be some links in the slides to different LSA related assistance that's available for these kind of classes. It's a good idea if you're going to do one of these projects to let us know that you're doing it, so that we can ensure that students have equal access to equipment and that they know where they can go for help. There is a dedicated group that can help students through technical issues, and they're really good at helping students through issues related to media projects. That's called Blue Core. Link is going to be in the description here, and we'll send that out with the email. Okay, so the next one we're going to talk about is original research and community-based projects. These are two completely separate things, obviously, but they have a lot of things in common, right? You have students going out and doing things beyond just collecting information. They're going to be making assessments. They're going to be analyzing. They're going to be comparing and contrasting. They're going to potentially be creating things based off of what they find. This is something that you wanted students to do because obviously once they get into professional life, this is a lot of what professional life looks like for people in academic studies. So you'll want to make sure that there's a bit of scaffolding involved. So they're doing a lower stakes collecting, or they're doing some baseline work about building up to their final project, and then having potentially some training, whether that's for original research, having the library come in and showing them the techniques that they need, or talking about, if they're going out into the community, talking about what kind of things they can expect, how to properly introduce themselves, how to properly engage with different community partners. One thing to keep in mind with both of these type of projects is there's a chance of failure, right? They could, there could be a snowstorm, right, that stops the community-based outreach that's happening. There could be the research question that you have may not bear any kind of data or usable data. And so having this chance of failure is actually an opportunity for learning, right? And being able to kind of turn this negative into a positive is going to be part of the design and part of your role as an instructor to help students kind of change these negative things. And also if they have, if they start showing that there's nothing here, or these people are not contacting us, you can redirect them to different questions or different groups that might be more fruitful. So having some kind of supervision over students doing this work is really crucial, or at least having check-ins with them, maybe even having outreach days, right, rather than office hours. Like you actually have them come to you once or twice a month to kind of go through what they're finding, what they're collecting. Also, leveraging some of the resources that are here at the university. We'll have links in the descriptions. There's a lot of resources within the library for this kind of work. Obviously, there's a bunch of research guides that across almost all of the disciplines. The Ginsberg Center can help make connections with community groups, and especially creating community-based education opportunities. And if you're further down the road and you have one of these already set up, there is a group called Seal Ride that can provide transportation opportunities for students doing this kind of work, where they can actually get a car loaned out to them to go off campus to meet with the groups that they're going to, and back. And there's a whole process for getting that set up. The other thing I'll mention here is that you can create a collection from student work. So This doesn't necessarily have to be done in one semester. It could be done over a course of a couple of years where students are contributing to a larger project that's related to your course. A good example here is in history, there have been a couple of examples of students going out and doing interviews with people and collecting ephemera and documenting that and creating online collections and curating that into a website that has original research and original history in it as well. So this can be something that can be built into your research as a faculty member.
All right, the next one is oral assessments. And when I think of oral assessments, I tend to think of language classes because that's kind of something that's already built into their classes. Being able to speak that language is something that they need to be assessed on frequently. But oral exams or assessments are beneficial to a range of subject areas, not necessarily just language classes. They really kind of force students to distill the material that they've learned kind of in relatively short and precise thoughts, and requires them to kind of think on their feet rather than preparing for a particular question or exam. And it really prepares them too for some real world experiences, such as job interviews, or, if they're going to be pursuing, higher level academic pursuits, that, these oral assessments are really going to help them build and become confident in those kind of speaking situations. So something to think about with oral exams is allowing students time to prepare for them ahead of time. And so something that I've seen is that instructors will kind of prepare a set of questions. And of course, you're going to have kind of a smaller set of questions, things that are kind of overarching topics or concepts that you've covered in your class that you're going to want the students to talk about to you during the exam. And so you may have, let's say 6 questions. And so you provide those 6 questions to the students ahead of time so that they can, sit down and prepare a little bit, look through their notes, kind of collect their thoughts, so that they can walk into the exam feeling a little bit more confident. This would also be a great time to have the students kind of work in pairs and be able to study and kind of practice back and forth with one another as well. And then the actual day of the assessment, when they come in, then they're only going to be assessed on a couple of those questions. So let's say 3 of them. And so you could have them roll a dice or pick numbers out of a hat of which of the 6 questions that they're actually going to have to answer that day during the exam. And then thinking about kind of scheduling and time allotment. So of course, oral exams may take a little bit longer time to actually administer because you're having to have the students come in one at a time. Each of them are going to have a certain, time allotment to complete the exam. And so it may upfront be a little bit more time for you to administer, but the grading aspect of it afterwards is going to be really cut down because you're going to be able to do a lot of your grading and assessment of them during their actual exam by taking notes, filling out a rubric. So most of that grading is going to be done by the time they walk out of the door. And you also want to prepare them ahead of time of how much time you're going to actually allow them to answer the questions. So say each student will get 4 minutes to answer each of the 3 questions. And so that really helps, allow you to stay on track with all of the assessments that you have to do. But then it also allows the students to kind of think ahead of time, okay, I'm only going to have 4 minutes. How do I want to kind of organize my thoughts and be able to answer everything that I want to talk about in that particular time frame? So that's kind of something to think about ahead of time and then make your students aware of before they're actually walking into the room to take the oral exam. And then something also to consider is having multiple oral exams throughout the term. And probably a lot of students, it's going to be their first time actually taking an oral assessment. And so the very first time they do it, they may be very nervous. They may have a lot of anxiety around it. They might be a little bit shy. And so providing them multiple opportunities throughout the term to kind of hone those skills, be able to be more confident and comfortable in sitting down and actually speaking with you one-on-one during an exam. By the last one that they do at the end of the term, they're going to be able to be more confident and hopefully be able to express their ideas a lot more clearly than they did at the very first one. And then again, having rubrics, providing those expectations ahead of time is really going to help you and the students in knowing what is it that I have to do in order to achieve a particular grade on this exam, and then being able to help you keep that grading consistent across all of the assessments as well. One other thing I wanted to mention too before we go on to the next one is that something with oral assessments that I've kind of thought about is you're able to, when students have questions on an exam, it's very difficult, especially during a remote type of situation where you're teaching online, for them to ask questions. If they had a question about a particular question on the exam, they're not going to have you readily available to answer those questions as they're taking the exam. But during an oral assessment, they can ask you questions right then and there. If they don't understand or if they need a question reworded, they can ask you to do that. And that will allow you to kind of help better understand what they know about the topic. If they give you a very short kind of brief answer, you can, ask follow-up questions to kind of dig deeper into what's their true understanding of this concept. So that's a nice benefit of oral exams as well, is being able to kind of reword questions or ask follow-up questions to students that you may not otherwise be able to do on other types of exams.
So next we're going to talk about group and solo presentations. So this also encompasses performance as well. So if there's say skits or potentially artistic expressions of course content, this would fall into it. So presentations build public speaking skills, which is a vital skill for students to succeed after. I'm sure a lot of you in getting the job you currently have had to give a job talk where you did a presentation in front of a bunch of strangers, right? This skill, being able to talk in front of an audience, is going to be a crucial kind of building block, and is something that you could help provide students an opportunity to explore. Some of the things to consider here, again, with the modality shift, right? You're changing it from a written form to a oral presentation. So there's some linguistic things, and also the slides that may be attached are all different aspects of the writing process, right? Also, thinking about groups. Doing group presentations, you might have to do this because of the amount of students in a course. You may not have the time to have each student give a presentation. So group presentations are a way of doing that, but you'll want to make sure of a couple of things. One, that you have some kind of peer feedback as part of your project. This will help you identify why a particular presentation may not have worked, and be able to identify if there were particular problematic students. This could help you not necessarily with the assessment of that course, but help you in the future to help identify similar situations occurring. Also, having things like assigned roles for the groups. So one person does research, or one person writes slides, or one person does a presentation, or splitting up the content. So let's say you're doing a biography presentation, one person does someone's early life, someone does their the middle of their life, and the other person does the latter half of their life, right? So maybe you split that up that way. Also, making sure that students, no matter if it's a group project or a solo project, submit some sort of source documentation, right? So if they're creating these slides and they're citing things, making sure that that's, say, on a separate document that's just a list of the sources that they cite, maybe even having links to the particular resources that they used. This way, there's a little bit of a rigor involved, and also you're ensuring that each presentation has a certain set number of research that's done. If you say, make sure that you cite at least 4 sources during your presentation, that's going to entail at least a little bit of research into the presentation. Our other big recommendation here is to set firm time limits for student presentations. It's very easy to go over, as any of you are probably aware. So having a set firm time limit that they have to stop by, and including into that time some Q&A. So maybe they have a 5-minute presentation and a 2.5-minute Q&A where they take questions from the students and from you. This will give you a couple of opportunities to, one, perhaps assess the audience on the questions that they ask, and also to see how rigorous the presentation actually was. If they're able to answer some tough questions, or if they are able to think on their feet, this might be very useful for getting a better idea of how to assess these particular students. Also, if they're doing anything that is that's not necessarily just reciting information that they found for research, if they're doing analysis as part of this, this allows an additional opportunity for more assessment of that analysis, right? Obviously. So the other thing is we recommend that you set aside some class time for prep. So perhaps one class or half of a class where group members can meet together and work within class. This will give you an opportunity to walk around the class and get an idea of how students are working together, and get a sense of if there are any problematic groups or groups that are far behind in their prep work. Also setting aside time for the final presentation. So maybe that's the last couple of classes, but making sure that those are available. And also, like everything, making sure that there's clear expectations for what's going to be involved in the presentation and delivery, and in the content of the presentation. So making sure that they have an idea of, what exactly you're looking for them to talk about. Another option, if you're running out of time, for example, if you have a lot of groups, is you could do something like a gallery walk. This would be students setting up different stations within a space, and whether or not this is open to the public or just open to the class. Maybe you have half the class do a gallery walk, set up for a gallery walk for one class, and then the other half sets up for the second one. And essentially you have people mill around to the different stations asking questions, kind of like a poster fair situation. This is another way where you can, have multiple groups going at once, and have a larger amount of groups potentially going, rather than have them each get 10 minutes of your class time. Maybe you have 10 groups and they all set up for a public presentation, for example. Okay, the last thing we want to talk about before we move on to talking about academic integrity and DEI is offering multiple options. So multiple options means that essentially you can offer, instead of your final project being a video project, maybe you offer a video project, podcast, journal, observations, presentation, just something, right? Different options, right, to students. This gives students the choice, and kind of empower students to choose things that they may feel comfortable with or they want to challenge themselves in. This can actually be a form of equity, right? Because certain students may have issues with writing, or students may have access issues that prevent them from writing longer papers, but may not have access issues with creating a video essay, for example, because they have a phone only, right, or a tablet only. They could potentially do something with video, but not necessarily writing. What this choice means is it doesn't mean that you have to allow everything. You can limit it to a couple of things. Like let's say you want to do a media project, but you don't want to limit them to just doing video. You can have them do a podcast or animation as well. You could have it limited to just one project rather than a couple of different projects during the semester. You could say have them write a traditional paper, but then the last project has to be something different, right? But it could mean full choice for students throughout the entire semester. This is a larger conversation to have. I will put some links into the slides about gameful pedagogy and offering a lot of different options for students to choose throughout the entire semester. It is something that kind of has to be built into the course and really integrated into your teaching. And so we can help you with that, but there are some resources to get you started about thinking about that if that's something that is interesting to you. The real difference here for expectations and rubrics here with offering different options is you don't want to create like 6 different rubrics for 6 different options. You'll want one rubric that really hones in on the course objective that you're trying to have them interact with, and have it be generalized rather than specific. And also with expectations, letting them know that, you know, just because you're allowing this choice doesn't mean that they can get around the rigor or the content that you're expecting them to deliver. Also, in terms of choice paralysis, which can happen if there are a lot of different options, students can essentially freeze up when deciding what to choose. Having deadlines and having proposals in particular can help avoid that choice paralysis. Students can essentially submit an idea to you about what their final project is going to look like, and you can kind of guide them one way or another to if it's a good idea or if it's too much that you think it's too much for them to take on for this project, or if it's not enough, you can obviously encourage them to do more. As far as scheduling considerations go, just making sure that if you are going to do this with it, that the students have enough time to create these kind of projects, right? So if you have 4 or 5 different options and they're all media projects, making sure that they have time to get equipment, to get training, to get all that kind of necessary scaffolding out of the way for them to be able to produce the work that you want them to create. Part of it too is that if they're looking for equipment rentals from us, or equipment loan from us, sorry, that it's not all tightened at the end of the semester, because that's the most difficult time for them to get loan equipment. Maybe they do it a couple weeks before. Maybe they do it as part of their midterm assessment. No matter what, if you're going to do something like this where you offer a bunch of different options to students, it's a good idea just to reach out to us to give us an idea of what you're doing, and also so we can get an idea of equipment needs for your class. Okay, so last we're going to talk a little bit about how these assessments relate to DEI and to academic integrity. So as I mentioned in the last one, offering different assessment choices can help eliminate access issues. For example, you know, with traditional exams, there may be problems with students' internet connections. There could be problems with student time and or potentially issues that you need to deal with as far as accommodations that may be more easily solved by just providing a different type of assessment, right? For example, if students don't have laptops, which most students do, but there's that little percentage that doesn't, or that little percentage that doesn't this semester, that could be a problem, right? And so you want to make sure that there is some alternative, or you can build an alternative into your lesson plan. On the contrary, on the flip side of that, there can be issues with access and with technology limitations with the type of projects that we're talking about here. So making sure that you have resources available for students to go to, for example, Bluecore or equipment loan, making sure that they have access to those resources by putting them in your syllabus, by putting them onto your Canvas site, making sure students know where to go when they need help. Another thing in terms of group projects is if you're going to do a group project, I highly recommend that you do some kind of development exercise that talks about group dynamics in relation to race, ethnicity, and inclusion. So I've linked in this slide LSA's inclusive teaching website, which has a bunch of different icebreakers that you can do with groups that kind of dive into where people are at, what identity, how identity plays into group work and into the course that you're in. This is not humanity specific. This can be done in legitimately every discipline. So if you're doing a group project within a STEM course, that you could still benefit from this. Okay, and then in terms of academic integrity, we've said this a lot, but providing expectations about what students are going to be doing and what original work means and what academic integrity in terms of that project means is really important. The in-class discussion that we've mentioned a couple of times, it doesn't have to take an entire class. It can be 10 minutes at the end of a class. It can be rather brief, but make sure it's a discussion and not you dictating, right? Make sure you get student feedback. You get questions from them about what they can and can't do, what they can and can't use in terms of that, so that you know that they know what the expectations are. And that if there are unreasonable expectations or accommodations that are needed, that you know that ahead of time. There are also a couple of different resources that we'll have in the slides that can be very helpful here. So there's a library research guide specifically on academic integrity that you can share with students or read yourself that has a lot of information about everything that we've talked about today in terms of academic integrity and what that might mean. Also, our previous seminar, if you missed out, we have that live on YouTube now. That has a lot of great information about how to have these kind of conversations with students and how to build traditional assessments, so exams, with academic integrity in mind, without having to resort to any kind of observation on the students themselves, right? So this is like remote exams or exams in person that go beyond the multiple choice, right? That go into integrity without needing any kind of additional software or tools.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and hopefully you were able to gain some valuable information. And of course, like we said before, Terry will send out that follow-up email.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how you may incorporate one of these into your course. We work with all departments across LSA, and I've had a lot of experience with just about everything that we've mentioned today. So if you ever are planning on doing something with that, like that, feel free to reach out to us. We are available for consultations and also for help during the semester.